On the third day of January in the mountain village of Tiana, a shepherd passed away at the age of 112. His name was Antonio Tad. For one full year prior to his passing, the record keepers at Guinness had recognized him as the oldest living man on Earth. He had walked the same rugged hills above Tiana for nearly a century, following the same kind of sheep his father had kept before him. And when a reporter finally asked him the question that everyone eventually asks, he did not speak about modern medicine. Instead, he said something almost annoyingly simple. Live without stress. Take one day at a time. Love your neighbor and have a small glass of red wine every day. That was the complete answer from a man who outlived 2 world wars and every doctor who had ever examined him when he was a boy. Here is the part that stayed with me. Todd was not a special case hiding in a normal place. Tiana sits inside a cluster of villages in the province of Neuro, where men reach the age of 100 at a rate almost no other place on Earth can match. Most of the world has roughly 1 male centenarian for every 5 female ones. However, in these Sardinian mountains, the men keep pace with the women. Something about how these shepherds live flattened that gap, and a great deal of it was sitting right on the kitchen table. There is a detail about these villages that says everything. When people in this part of Sardinia raise a glass, they do not say cheers or good health. They say a cantonanos, to 100 years. It is the ordinary toast, the one you give a child, a bride, or a stranger at a feast. It is a whole culture that treats reaching 100 not as a miracle, but as the normal, expected destination of a life lived right. Antonio Tad grew up hearing that toast at every table. He simply took it further than anyone else. And the journalists who went to Tiana to find his secret kept expecting some hidden thing, some local plant or spring water nobody else knew about. What they found instead was almost disappointing in its plainness. Hard work outdoors, strong family ties, very little money, and therefore very little processed food, and a diet that had not changed in any meaningful way in 300 or 400 years. Before we get to the table, understand the body that table was feeding. A shepherd like Todd did not go to a gym. He climbed. Researchers who studied these villages found the men walking 5, 6, sometimes 8 kilometers a day. Much of it was up and down steep ground behind animals that set the pace. That is not exercise as we think of it. It is low, steady, all-day movement, the kind that builds the legs and the heart without ever wrecking the joints. So picture the food landing inside that body. Slow grain, sheep ferment, bitter greens, all of it fueling a man who was moving gently for most of his waking hours. The food and the movement were never 2 separate projects. They were one life. So let me tell you what was actually on that table. Not a theory. These are the foods a Sardinian mountain shepherd ate week after week, decade after decade. There are 7 of them. And the first one surprised the researchers more than anything else. It was barley. Plain barley. When scientists went back through the dietary records of the Sardinian men who reached 100, barley was the single food most tightly linked to extreme age. Not olive oil, not wine, barley. These shepherds ate it as bread, baked dense and dark, and they ate it stirred into soup nearly every day. The reason matters far more than the fact. Barley raises your blood sugar slowly, far slower than wheat does. A man eating a barley-heavy plate puts almost no stress on his pancreas across a meal. The sugar trickles in instead of flooding in. Do that 3 times a day for 90 years, and you have a pancreas that never burned out, kidneys that were never pushed hard, and blood sugar that stayed flat across an entire human life. Honestly, when I first saw barley sitting at the top of that list, I assumed it was a measurement quirk, some accident of how the survey was done. Then I read the why. It is not a quirk. It is the quiet engine under everything else. Compare that to the bread most of us grew up on. Soft, white, fast. It hits the blood like sugar water and spikes the system. Over decades, that constant spiking is what wears the pancreas down and lays the ground for the slow drift into diabetes. The shepherds never had that loaf. They had a grain that asked the body for patience. That one swap, fast grain for slow grain, may have bought them years. Here is something you can do this week, and it costs almost nothing. Buy a bag of hulled barley. Most supermarkets carry it near the rice and the lentils. Make a pot of it the way you would make rice. Then keep it in the fridge. Spoon it into soup. Fold it into a salad. Eat it warm with a little olive oil and salt. You do not need a Sardinian recipe, and you do not need a special pot. You need the grain on your plate more days than not. While you are in the kitchen, go look in your pantry right now. If the only grain you can find is white rice and white flour, that is the first thing the shepherds would have changed. The second food was fermented sheep milk. In Tiana, they call it gyodu. It is the island's old yogurt, tangy and thick, made from the milk of grazing sheep and set with live cultures passed kitchen to kitchen for generations. A shepherd would eat it in the morning with a thread of bitter honey stirred through. Gyodu delivered two things at once: living bacteria that fed the gut and calcium in a form the body absorbs more easily than the calcium in cow's milk. Sheep grazing wild mountain pasture also gave that milk a fat profile closer to what your joints and your brain actually want, richer in the fats that calm inflammation rather than feed it. So, a single bowl was breakfast, probiotic, and bone support, all before the man left the house. If you can find a plain sheep or goat milk yogurt where you shop, that is the closest honest match. Live cultures, no sugar added, eaten in the morning. Even a plain full-fat cow's yogurt beats a sweetened, low-fat one. The sweetening is the part that undoes it. The third food makes people raise an eyebrow because most of us throw it straight in the bin. The cardan. It is the wild cousin of the artichoke, a tall, silver-green thistle that grows along the edges of Sardinian fields. The shepherds boiled the stalks and ate them all through the winter. The cardan carries a kind of fiber called inulin, the type your gut bacteria ferment instead of you digesting it. That fermentation feeds the exact microbes that keep the lining of your colon calm and well-fed. Those microbes, in turn, produce compounds that travel to the rest of the body and lower background inflammation. The cardan also carries bitter compounds that nudge the liver to clear fats more efficiently. The same family of compounds modern science pulls out of the artichoke and sells in a capsule. The shepherds just ate the plant, a bitter vegetable most modern shoppers have never cooked, doing quiet work on the gut and the liver at the same time. You can find the same family at any store. Globe artichokes or even celery hearts and chicory scratch the same itch. The lesson is the bitterness. The shepherds never trained themselves out of bitter food the way we have. Let me pause on that because it is the real thread running through this whole list. Every food here shares one quality. None of it is sweet and none of it is soft. A shepherd's palate was built around grain, ferment, bitterness, and broth. Our palate has been rebuilt around sugar and smoothness. Food that needs almost no chewing and asks nothing of the gut. That single shift from bitter and slow to sweet and fast may explain more about why we age the way we do than any one nutrient on this list. Keep it in mind as we go, because it comes back at the end. The fourth food appeared only on special days, and what it tells you about the other days matters more than the food itself. It was su filindeo, the threads of God. They call it a pasta so fine and so difficult to make that today, only a handful of women in the town of Noro still know how. The dough is pulled by hand into hundreds of hair-thin strands, layered into a delicate web, dried in the sun, then broken into a broth of grazing sheep and finished with fresh sheep cheese. It was eaten after a long pilgrimage on foot, a reward at the end of real effort. And that is the entire point. The shepherds did not eat their richest, most labor-intensive food every day. They earned it a few times a year after walking for hours through the mountains. Abundance was rare, and it was always tied to movement. The everyday plate was barley, greens, and beans. The feast was a punctuation mark, not the whole sentence. I think we have inverted that completely. For most people now, the feast is the everyday, and the simple plate is the rare exception. We eat the rich, soft, celebratory food on a random Tuesday alone in front of a screen. The shepherds had it the other way around, and their bodies kept the receipts for 100 years. Now let me take you inside one of those everyday meals because this is where the whole thing comes alive. Picture the middle of the day in Tiana. The sun is high, the work is paused, and the shepherd has come down off the hill. There is no rushing. A pot of barley and bean soup sits on the table, thick enough to stand a spoon in, flecked with whatever bitter green was growing nearby. There is a round of dark bread, torn by hand, not cut, There is a small glass of dark red wine. And there are other people, a wife, a brother, a neighbor, children underfoot. The meal takes an hour, maybe more. Nobody eats standing up. Nobody eats fast. The food is plain to the point of poverty, and the table is rich to the point of overflowing. That contrast is not a detail for these men. That midday table, slow and shared and unhurried, was as much medicine as the barley in the bowl. A body eating that way is a body whose stress hormones drop through the middle of the day instead of climbing. Over a century, that daily hour of calm is its own kind of nutrient. The fifth food was honey, but not the honey you are picturing. In these mountains, they prize Corbazzolo honey, made from the blossom of the strawberry tree. It is famously, almost shockingly bitter. People who expect sweetness spit it out the first time they try it, and that bitterness is the medicine. Corbazzolo honey is unusually dense in a class of antioxidant compounds that ordinary clover or wildflower honey simply does not carry. Compounds that fight the same oxidative damage that ages the blood vessels and the skin. A shepherd's spoonful of it stirred into geodu. In the morning was not a treat. It was closer to a tonic. Now I want to be honest with you. You are not going to find Sardinian strawberry tree honey at the corner store. And I am not going to pretend you should spend a fortune hunting for it. The transferable idea is smaller and cheaper. When you do eat honey, choose a dark, strong, raw, single-flower honey over the pale, processed kind, and use a little, not a lot. The darker and more bitter the honey, the more of those protective compounds it tends to carry. The sixth was not food at all in the way we usually think of it. It was a tea. The shepherds gathered a fuzzy, yellow-flowered plant that grows wild across the dry Sardinian hills. Helichrysum, what they call Helichrysum, and they steeped it into a daily infusion. It carries a compound researchers have been studying for years for its calming effect on inflammation. That slow background fire that drives so much of what goes wrong in the body after 60, from stiff joints to tired arteries. The shepherds did not know the chemistry and did not need to. They knew the tea settled the stomach and eased the chest, and they drank it the way you might drink your morning coffee, out of habit every day without thinking of it as health. A warm cup of a bitter mountain herb every single day, quietly turning down the heat inside the body. If you want the same idea without flying to Sardinia, a daily cup of a real herbal infusion, chamomile, sage, rosemary, anything genuinely herbal and unsweetened, carries some of the same spirit. The point is the daily ritual of a warm, plant-based, sugar-free cup. And the seventh food closes the circle back to the first. Bread again, but the other Sardinian bread, civraio. It is a round, hearty sourdough of durum wheat, fermented slowly with a living starter before it ever saw the oven. That long ferment does something a quick factory loaf can never do. The wild yeast and bacteria predigest part of the starch and break down the parts of the grain that irritate so many people's guts. What comes out is a bread that sits gently on the blood sugar and easy on the stomach. The exact opposite of the soft white loaf most of us were raised on. A shepherd tore off a piece of civraio with every meal and was the better for it. The closest thing on your shelf is a real slow-fermented sourdough from an actual baker, the kind that takes more than a day to make and goes stale in 3. Not the supermarket loaf that wears the word sourdough on the label and lasts 2 weeks in plastic. If it does not go stale, it was not really fermented. Here is your second small task for the week, and it goes with the bread. The next time you sit down to eat, slow it down on purpose. Tear the bread instead of cutting it. Put the phone in another room. Take twice as long as you normally would over a plain meal with at least one other person if you can manage it. It sounds too simple to matter, but remember what the midday table did for those shepherds. Half the medicine on that Sardinian table was never on the plate at all. It was in how slowly and with whom the plate got eaten. You can borrow that part tonight for free without buying a single new thing. So there is the table. Barley, geodu, cardon, sufilindeo, corbazzolo honey, helichrysum tea, and civraio bread. 7 foods, and not one of them is exotic in spirit. Even if the name sounds strange, it is just a slow grain, a live ferment, a bitter green, A feast that has to be earned, a dark honey used sparingly, a daily herbal cup, and a real fermented bread. That is not a diet you go on and come off. That is the way a man like Antonio Tad ate from the year he was born until the year he turned 112. And I keep coming back to his own answer because it sits right alongside the food and finishes it. A small glass of red wine every day, one day at a time, and love your neighbor. The wine was Canino, the dark Sardinian red that grows in those same hills, and he drank it exactly the way you would expect. A single glass at the table with people, with bread, never alone, and never to excess. The food kept his body running, the table kept him connected to other human beings. In these villages, the two things were never separate. You did not eat barley soup standing at a counter checking a phone. You ate it slowly in the warm middle of the day, with the work set down and the wine poured, and someone across from you. There is one thing the studies still argue about, and I would rather tell you straight than pretend it is settled. Researchers do not fully agree on how much of this is the food and how much is the genes these isolated mountain families carried untouched for centuries. Tad's own relatives were long-lived, so part of his 112 years was almost certainly written into him before he ate his first bowl of barley. And no diet on earth will hand most of us 112 years. But here is what those same researchers do agree on, and it is the part that matters for you. The diet did not fight the genes, it expressed them. The families with the best genes and the worst modern diets do not reach these ages anywhere. It takes both the inheritance and the table, and only one of those two is in your hands tonight. You cannot choose your grandparents. You can choose the grain in your bowl, the slowness of your lunch, and whether the food you eat is bitter and alive or sweet and dead. Tad did not have more willpower than you. He had a village that made the right food the only food, and a body that moved gently all day long. Most of us have to rebuild that on purpose now, one swap at a time. That is harder, but it is not impossible. So if you take one single thing from a shepherd who is no longer here to explain it himself, let it be the simplest one on the list. Tomorrow morning, before the day gets loud, make the barley. A pot of it, plain, kept in the fridge for the week. Eat it slow, sometime in the warm middle of the day, with a little olive oil and whoever you can pull up to the table beside you. That one grain was the quiet engine under the longest male life Sardinia ever recorded. The honey and the herb tea and the rest of it can come later. Start with the grain and start with the table. What is the one bitter, slow, honest food your own grandmother ate every day that you quietly stopped eating somewhere along the way? Tell me in the comments. I read them. If this story of the Sardinian shepherds has changed the way you look at the simple grains in your pantry, please subscribe and like the channel. We are uncovering the ancient wisdom and history that the modern world has tried to bury. Let's cultivate a healthier future together. Our next exploration into the secrets of longevity will open soon.